I'm always keeping tabs of who's walking up the walk and whether we're going to give them enough time or not. And it's not like I choose. It's like, oh, it's so-and-so, we'll just get started. Or, oh, we've got to wait for them. It's just more about numbers. And if you see action in the parking lot. But as always, I added a couple of the optional discussions today because I thought, again, a couple weeks here we've done that because we were on the verge of finishing early, and we would never want to do that. So, yeah. So we wind up running like 1 minute over, but that's okay too. Continuing our work on the subject matter of prayer, as always, please take a moment to look at the front cover of the Bible study to see where we've been and where we're heading, which, by the way, 2 things about these Bible studies now. If you've missed any of them and you would like to go back through it, please do not hesitate to ask for a copy of the printed materials for that lesson. And then on our YouTube channel, you can walk right through the Bible study with the group that day. I'm trying to, whenever I can, repeat answers, so that's another reminder too. When you're answering, be as loud as you can be because it can pick you up, but also the idea of, because remember there are a number of different ways that happens here with our sound system. But also, when I repeat your answer for the group, it's not always just for the group, it's also for the ever-present cameras in our lives now. All right, so today's regular and systematic prayer, we're going to look at some examples from fellow Christians, and then we're going to look at the greatest example of all. And, the only reason there isn't a capital G on the greatest example of all is it's trying to get you to wonder who it is, right? We begin then. The prophets and apostles knew about the benefits of regular prayer. So did the author of Psalm 119, so we read that responsibly. In the night I remember your name, O Lord, and I will keep your law. I rise before dawn and cry for help. I have put my hope in your word. My eyes stay open through the watches of the night, that I may meditate on your promises. 7 times a day I praise you for your righteous laws. Oh, how I love your law. I meditate on it all day long. We pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the privilege of speaking with you in prayer. Enrich our prayer lives so that we use this privilege at every opportunity. Amen. So a quick question before we get into it. Why do you suspect the author of our Bible study selected that psalm for this topic? One particular phrase I'm seeing, and it's the one I want to talk about. Okay. Look also at the topic for the day. Anybody else seeing it? Oliver, go ahead. Yep. 7 times a day. Does that challenge you? If you set the goal of making sure I stop to thoughtfully engage in prayer 7 times a day during my regular day, how many people here would actually reach that goal on most days? You start thinking of it. Not the moments where you're just saying what you need to say, because those are those perpetual, pray continuously things. But formally, intentionally, thoughtfully invested in prayer 7 different times a day. That would be pretty aggressive, wouldn't it, for anybody? And it's not as though it's prescribed. That's not the way that it works. In fact, we're going to talk about that a little bit in the course of this Bible study. And yet we see the pattern of believers throughout the ages. 7 is likely picked there because of the way that 7 plays its role, especially in the Old Testament. 7 days of creation, all kinds of things multiplied by 7 and so on, and the idea of how it's considered to be a number associated with the Trinity. 7 plus 3 in the Trinity, and then you got 10. That becomes a number. 12 becomes a number.
And we're on lesson 7.
We are on lesson 7, absolutely. There are 2, you're just trying to make up for the fact that your son saw something that you didn't see. There are 2 excellent ways to destroy our prayer lives. One way is to create an elaborate system of rules for which prayers should be said and when. Prayer then becomes a matter of keeping the rules instead of a joyful heart-to-heart talk with God. The result is a ritualistic going through the motions. Most people become irritated with the rules and abandon prayer altogether. The other way is to insist that all prayers must be completely spontaneous, that giving any thought to when we'll pray or what we'll say is somehow wrong, that we should pray only when the mood strikes us and we're 100% certain we feel like it. In theory, that sounds like a good way to make sure prayer never becomes forced or artificial. In practice, however, it can become a good way to make sure prayer never happens. Surely it's possible to avoid both extremes and cultivate a prayer life that has elements both of regularity and spontaneity. Now, another little quick follow-up question, just as a thought thing. How good are you at doing things you don't really feel like doing, even if they really need to be done? Some people are really good at just saying, I don't feel like it, I'm not doing it. But life doesn't work that way, does it? If you're going to play that game with yourself even, there's going to be all kinds of things that later on you're going, well, I really could have done that with that time, but just wasn't feeling it in the moment, and then it's costly. Sometimes it involves all kinds of different consequences. We're going to start in Daniel. That shouldn't be a surprise that when we're looking at examples from fellow Christians that we're going to Daniel. And I suspect you know exactly which portion of Daniel we're going to look at. It's very familiar. We're going to start at verse 6 on page 1273. But before we read it, I have a question for you. And I ask this question pretty much every time Daniel comes up in a context like this, because I never know who's gathered that hasn't heard the question before. In your mind's eye, you see Daniel, you see him in that lion's den. How old is he? There's a vote for young. You know, if you think about your children's Bible story books and things like that, those lessons, they always depict him as really quite young, and that gets in our head, doesn't it? But if you follow the trajectory of Daniel, the book, this happens toward the end of his career. It's not the Babylonians, it's the Assyrians that we're dealing with, or the Medes and Persians that we're dealing with at this point. And by the way, we always joke, especially amongst the men of the group that we've been studying Daniel, whether you say Darius or Darius depends on whether you're a Hootie and the Blowfish fan or not, right? But that idea of recognizing Darius is the king, this is likely 70s at least, if not into his 80s at this point of his life, because he was already an established person in Israel before he was captured and taken into captivity. So he had to at least be in his 20s, perhaps even 30 years old, at the point that he's taken into captivity, and he's recognized as being someone of value, so that he's treated uniquely and specially from that point forward. So at the point that we meet him in these verses, and that's the reason I asked the question, he is a very well-seasoned and experienced man of significant importance in the world of his day. Because remember what was happening here. World leader supplanted world leader by devastating that. I mean, it's kind of interesting how that works. If you could even envision it in this day and age, like one superpower completely annihilates another superpower, but says to leaders from those vanquished, oh, I value you as a leader. You come be this very important government leader in my cabinet now. Everybody would go, wait, that doesn't work that way. But it did with these men, not just Daniel, but other examples in the book of Daniel. And so he winds up being a provincial governor. He winds up being like a very important and prominent advisor to the most powerful men of the world in succession. And so you got to start wondering if we were going to chart and say who in the Bible is presented to us as the wisest and the most able, after, you got Solomon, and David clearly is a very brilliant person, and you got Moses. Right up in the mix with all of that is Daniel with his intellect and his ability and his wisdom. So, with that all in mind, let's start reading at verse 6. These administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. How far are we supposed to read? Right through there. There's so much more that you want to get into. It's, oh, come on. This has got so much to go. Okay, so let's look at the questions, but let's also bring some side issues in too. But the first question is, what was Daniel's regular practice of prayer? It's identified over the course of the lessons. 3 times a day. What else would he do? Would he do it silently and quietly? He kneels. What else did he do? Yep. Opens windows, kneels towards, and it's likely that he was doing something that was audible to his neighbors and things too. So it's not like he goes home so that he can go into his closet and lock all the doors and nobody can see him and then he's going to pray there. No, it's just the opposite. He's doing what he always did without interruption. What potential obstacle to this practice did he encounter? This edict. Yep. Okay, let's get into the edict a little bit with detail. The whole edict was built specifically because of the way Daniel was so regular with his prayers and his conduct. They knew exactly where to find him, when. It's like, okay, they get this all passed, and the very first time they have the opportunity, oh, sure, that's where Daniel is. So let's dig into that a little bit for a second. Why did they hate Daniel so much?
Well, I think that what we're seeing is they really thought there was power in his prayer because he was so successful. So they may have felt like they were circumventing his relationship with this guy. That, knew how to do.
They were afraid of him, and they were jealous of him, and I would not push back at all. What she was saying was the idea of they also valued and understood the power of Daniel's relationship with his God and what that meant for him in the way that he carried out his abilities.
It wasn't even being like next. It was highly sought after as a potential leader, right?
Okay, he was always in the mix of being the top echelon of most important advisors and governors and agents for the most powerful person in the world of the day. Add to that another dimension, why do they hate him? In that context.
Probably jealous.
But why are they so jealous? What's different about Daniel?
Could I suggest wisdom?
It can be simpler than that, but wisdom is a part of it. They were jealous of his wisdom because he was smarter than all of them. He's Jewish. Don't forget that element to it, that whole idea of he's a captive. He's supposed to be out in the field somewhere or back in Egypt making bricks. You start thinking about the commonality with Moses once Moses understands who he is and how he's not really, Pharaoh's. And the way that the movie plays that out with Charlton Heston, don't think it took that long into his life before he ever knew, I'm Moses, holy cow. But that idea of just recognizing what's going on here. They hate this man for all the reasons that we mentioned. I mean, he's faithful to a foreign god, so they target that. He's extremely valuable to the king. They don't understand the wisdom and the abilities that he has, and he's forever likely witnessing, very much so, to the fact that everything that is valued about him is from his God. Because don't forget, if you look back at the verses again, what is one element of all of his prayers 3 times a day? It's thanksgiving. Thanksgiving for who he is and the role that he's being allowed to play for his own people and the people of the whole world of the day. I mean, Daniel's right there. I mean, if there was media like we have it now, everybody in the world would know who Daniel was in that day. He was that. And so, think about it from this perspective. They're working. How do we get rid of Daniel? How do we get rid of Daniel? How do we get rid of Daniel? How do we get rid? And what do they hit on? Oh, this is going to be easy. We'll go after him spiritually. So let's take a second to think about what they actually did. What is this decree all about, this edict that Daniel immediately responds to by doing what he always did?
That the king, that was his fault, would be God. That they're taking away Daniel's God and he followed.
Okay, so the monarch is now in place of God for all people who he rules for 30 days. There's something very important for you to have in your mind if it's not there yet. Ancient peoples, even through the Romans and beyond, they would deify most of their leaders, especially what they considered to be the best of all their leaders. In other words, as a part of the regular mourning after the death of a very important and powerful person, part of that would be elevating them, not just like a saint, but elevating them to the pantheon of gods from that point forward. So this is exactly what they're doing with old Darius. And you think about this for a minute. They're buttering him up and they're saying, we're all in this together. That's why you get that list of all the different positions, you know? It's like it repeats itself over and why do they say that each time? They're trying to help him understand. All of us, they're hoping he doesn't notice. He doesn't ask, is Daniel in on this? He doesn't ask that. But they say, all of us, O king, we don't want to wait till you're dead to worship you. We want to worship you while you're still alive and you can hear us worship you and you can see us worship you as a God. What do you think about that, O king? Well, what king's going to go, no, this is not a good idea. I don't want you people worshiping me, because his whole goal of life has been to be so good of a ruler, so powerful, so invested in his people's lives that even if he's a violent man and has kept them safe that way, they're looking at him as somebody who absolutely has to be added to the gods of this nation or this ethnic group or whatever else it might be. So this was like the biggest honor somebody could possibly have, to already be treated as a god before you're dead. Oh, absolutely, let's do it. One last thing, there's a lot of other details we could dig into, but one last thing that we have to understand about Daniel's dedication. When you hear somebody refer to something as solid or concrete as the laws of the Medes and the Persians, why do they reference it that way? Do you remember? It plays out in Esther as well, and other books of the Bible that deal with this historic period of time.
Well, I think that once this edict goes into place, it's not going to be taken away.
Right.
It's cemented.
You start thinking about, in this day and age, the way you have balance of power and everything else, that didn't exist back then. And so by the time you convinced a world leader to put his seal on a decision and proclaim it, it was no longer repealable. It had to be done. It absolutely had to be done. And so look again at those first verses that we're supposed to read. Daniel finds out about it and immediately responds by going and doing exactly what it forbids him to do. It's not like he waits a couple of days and goes, well, should I, shouldn't I don't know. Where should I do it? No. Nothing's going to interrupt his pattern of behavior regarding his relationship with his God, his time in the Word, and his prayer life. There's absolutely nothing. So Daniel's practice is not commanded anywhere in Scripture. Why then did he keep at it even when it put his life in danger? Okay? He sees God as the only God, so it doesn't really matter. John? It's that trust and reliance.
I would say it was his standard practice. You just said it's his standard practice. So he's not doing this just to defy. There's not a selfish ambition. It's,
Yep.
I did it this way every time, and I'm going to continue doing
Yep.
it this way every time.
So the trust turns into an expression of character. So what Paul is saying is he's not doing it defiantly. He's not doing it to get the spotlight on himself. In fact, he's hoping to avoid the spotlight. But this idea of this is, and it's important for us to recognize this. And I hope that sometimes in your own lives, when you're being tempted, this idea of what makes me the person that I am that other people value. And what's fascinating about it is how often this probably comes into the conversation if you're willing to use it. You've got a boss, you've got a neighbor, you've got a friend, or maybe it's somebody you're building a relationship with. And they want you to do something that's outside of your comfort zone that you know isn't appropriate, maybe even sinful. Why not say to them in response, you value me as the person that I am because of my character, which is all about my relationship with my God. And instead of trying to pull me out of that relationship into a context where I'm demonstrating more allegiance to you than to him, you're honoring who I am based on what I was before this moment and allowing me to stay within the framework of my character and my values. And so what you're really talking about here is this idea of somebody saying, there aren't any rules or laws about this, but this is the way I've determined and pretty much probably vowed that I will do this, and I've kept this pattern, and this is what I'm going to do, no matter what anybody else is saying, no matter what else is happening. And you start thinking about that. I mean, personal character for Daniel was an enormous thing that gave him the ability to do all the things that he was doing. And he's saying, that's my foundation. That's my foundation for doing wise things, good things, important and powerful things for many people as a tool of my Creator on a daily basis. I'm not going to suddenly start chipping away at that foundation because of this other thing that's happening in my life. He knew where all of that came from. And so it's a complete package kind of a thing where he knows if I'm not doing for myself what I've determined is most important to keep that foundation strong, and I'm letting other people determine, no matter who those other people are, what that's going to be, I've already lost. And so he just keeps going. Let's go ahead.
I was thinking that we're known by our friends, and so this king's wisdom comes from the very people that are coming to him about this edict, which includes Daniel. I don't think they got through what they were doing because it was about jealousy, and that is a death. That's a death on many levels. And they were setting their king up, and if it fails, they're going to be the ones that are in trouble because he's going to recognize what they did. And it's like they unhinged their brain for a minute and out of pride, and then they were in trouble.
So everything, and it's all within the fabric of the same culture. Everything you just said right there is exactly true also of Haman, who winds up hanged on the gallows that he had built for Mordecai in the book of Esther. It's exactly the same thing. And so that you start thinking about the mind, even of very powerful, important, and what seemingly culturally wise people, when they're up against God, I mean, it seems to us that they're not thinking it through and what the consequences might be, that the punishment that they're trying to get for Daniel winds up being their own at the end of it because of how this plays out. They just look at it as, we're going to get this decree that can never be repealed established. They never think about, well, this true God that they believe in, whoever this is that we're trying to attack, he even has ways of blunting all of that and turning this against us. It's not even in the fabric of their concepts of what they're talking about. So anytime you're up against the true God, you have no idea what you're doing. I would agree with that. Let's go to the book of Acts with this next one. Acts chapter 2, there we're looking at verse 1, then verse 15, and then we're going to 10. So we're going to go to page 1550. Page 1550. Acts chapter 2, first verse 1. When the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place. Verse 15. These people are not drunk as you suppose. It's only 9 in the morning. Now let's go to chapter 10, and let's look at verses 9 first, and then back to verse 3. So in chapter 10, we're looking at page 1566. About noon the following day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. And then we look back at verse 3 of that same chapter. One day at about 3 in the afternoon, he had a vision. He distinctly saw an angel of God who came to him and said, Cornelius. Okay, so why the scavenger hunt through the passages? Because the author is trying to point you out to the dial of the clock that each, so instead of going boom, 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 and back again. So what's the point here? The question is, what 3 regular times for prayer does the early church seem to have observed? Peter clearly is doing that in his personal life. There will be other places where it's also identified. 9, noon, and 3. Yeah. And you start thinking about it. Over the course of the workday. If you have a 9-hour workday, you begin each segment of your workday with prayer. So when you begin in the morning, when you finish your lunch break, and then after you've taken your quick afternoon nap, right? Which anybody that gets a little bit over 40, 45 years old says, if I'm going to finish out this day with any value, I've got to shut my eyes for at least 5 minutes here somewhere with nobody knowing that I'm doing it, right? And then once you're past that moment of fogginess, you thank the Lord for getting you awake and alert again and ready to address the rest of the day. The point being, there was a very regular pattern. They had established times of prayer. They had that in the Old Testament temple itself, with different services that happened at different times of the day. And the church continued that into the generations that followed. And eventually it pretty much developed into morning prayer, matins, evening prayer, vespers, and some of those had differentiations between them in regard to what time of the day it actually happened. Between the end of the workday being one and then bedtime prayers being the other, and that idea of opportunities for people in communities, whether that be a monastery or a convent, or communities where there was a large, maybe cathedral or something like that for the entire area, there were established patterns of times of prayer. And then, one of the habits we have, not necessarily in this congregation anymore because it got to be too tricky with the remote control that we had, but we once were still doing it prior to giving that up, especially with all the guest organists and things. We used to ring the bell, the tolling bell, during what? The Lord's Prayer. And that was timed with certain words in the Lord's Prayer so that anybody out in the community near enough to the church to hear the bell ringing and knew that it was a time of the day that a service of prayer was going on, but they had too much work to do to be able to prepare. Participate was the word I was going for. It was not coming. It was just not coming. Participate in person. That was too much alliteration there. The idea of they could stop and still participate in a prayer in the Lord's Prayer in the middle of whatever they were doing. And so the Christian community has long had this practice of established patterns of prayer during the day, whether that be public or whether that be personal. So his word in my life, respond to these objections to regular prayer. I don't have time. I just know I'll forget. My family is never together. There's no good time when we can pray together. It all seems so mechanical. I don't know how to start. Let's just go with those, and then the other one is another react after that. Any of those that you want to address, or if you want to go down the list of them.
I'm going to respond to the first one. If you don't have time to pray to God, you got time to mess up?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you got time for everything, including all the big errors of life, that prayer might actually give you some time instead of costing you time, right?
Talking about maybe covers a couple, but I just know I'll forget. It's setting up as a schedule.
Yep.
Standard time to pray.
Yep.
It's meals, midday. Sticking to it.
And being at the stage of life that I forget so many things, including, and hopefully not you today, the first name of the person that's standing in front of me at the moment. I still laugh about that one because I think it was a conversation we were all having staff-wise, and we were trying to come up with somebody's name. And I could tell them the name of every member of the family and even the last name, but I couldn't come up with the first name of that one family member. Just like, but that idea of recognizing the less you remember, the more important patterns are to you, right? Because I always do this at this time every day, I'm going to remember it, versus if I let it just be any old place on my schedule, some days I'm going to hit it, some days I'm not. So my routine, my patterns, and so, yeah, that idea of you're more likely to remember it if you set a pattern rather than the opposite. Any of the other ones? Yep. Yep. And so pray with whom you're with at the moment, right? So families never being together, you got two options there. Pray with who you are with, or the idea of maybe a family that's never ever together has to work on some other issues in regard to the organization of their family life. Pastor?
I think one of the things we fall victim to is feeling that prayer needs to be a perfect exercise.
Right.
You have to do it perfectly. I think it answers a lot of these objections too, that I'm going to forget, so why start? I don't have time, so why even try? And prayer is not a new law. It's an opportunity to give your heart to God and trust Him that He hears.
And sometimes pastors run into that in particular, where you finally arrive at a situation where everybody's tense and everybody's all sideways because of what's going on very unexpectedly, and the pastor arrives and they go, finally we can pray about this. You go, what? Or that idea of, well, we asked you to come because you've got an in with God, and we think we've all been praying without as much impact as it will have because you're now here added to this prayer. And families sometimes do the same thing with individual family members. Well, we got to wait for the prayer warrior of the group. We got to wait for that person to be here, and actually maybe that's the person that says the words the best way, kind of a thing. No, prayer is not a perfect thing, and prayer is intended to be always a spontaneous thing, but not always in the sense of always meaning it's never inappropriate, not always as in that's the way it's got to be, because we use organized prayers all the time, and the prayers that we use in worship, if you're paying attention to them and you're following them, you realize the variety and the depth and just all the different things that we talk about over the course of especially a church year in regard to our public worship. It's stunning in regard to what never kind of gets beyond us. Everything gets addressed. So the mechanical part of it is the other thing that I would also say. If it feels mechanical, then it's time for some correction also there as well. If you're just repeating mechanically things that you're not really engaged in with your mind, then stop using those prayers that have become mechanical to you. That doesn't mean don't ever pray the Lord's Prayer, even in worship. It means the opposite. When others are praying the Lord's Prayer and you're joining in, engage. The mechanical elements of it are get the gears all meshed together. All right, react. One of the reasons we tend to neglect prayer is that we live in a society that values doing over thinking. Does that one hit you? Does that one go, holy cow, I never thought of it that way, but oh yeah, okay. Missed my opportunity to pray. It's too late to pray about this thing. It seems like it's all decided already. That's an interesting one. Yeah.
So nobody goes on a trip without planning.
Yep.
Time, right? So prayer does have an element of
Yeah. You're going to plan your trips. You're going to plan your lives. You're going to plan all kinds of other things. The planning for prayer, the work behind that as well. Couldn't this be added to the effort part of things? If you're saying, if I'm really working for something, why wouldn't I add working at praying about it with the one who makes the biggest difference as to whether or not it's going to be fruitful? We miss the connection of how this is actually also work, so to speak. And then the flip side of that. Is it ever a good thing where you just say, okay, God, this is on you. I'm just going to pray about it, but I'm not going to do a doggone thing about it myself, even if I have the opportunity, because this is up to you? I mean, you see that and you hear that in all kinds of people who are really hoping somebody they love and somebody they value in their life who's not a believer will become a believer. And they pray and pray and pray and pray and pray for somebody else to make the difference in their life. And you say, no, wait a minute now. What are you also doing along with those prayers to make sure, are you sharing the word? Are you living your faith? Make sure you're also engaged. So this is faulty reasoning here again too. This idea of both and all the time. Christians of the past made prayer a regular part of their schedule. So guess who we're going to look at in regard to the greatest example of all? All of these are from the Gospel of Luke. So I would encourage that we all find all of them. And how many fingers you got? Does that work? But just pages wise. Let's go to Luke 3 first of all. Luke 3:21, you're going to find on page 1462. The 6 just jumped out at me. 1462. Oh, already lost one trying to do the 5-finger thing. All right. We got a lot of them. All right, starting first of all, verse 21. When all the people were being baptized, Jesus was baptized too. And as he was praying, heaven was open. That little detail about Jesus' baptism, has it jumped out at you before? While he's being baptized and immediately after his baptism, he's praying. All right, let's turn a couple pages to Luke chapter 6, verse 12. Luke chapter 6, verse 12. There you're going to be on page 1468. There again, verse 12. One of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray, and he spent the night praying to God. Notice what comes next. There's a really cool hymn that's usually used at like pastoral installations or ordinations, but other times of the year in regard to called ministry, where the title of the hymn itself is about, O Lord, a night in prayer you spent, and then you came and you commissioned your 12 apostles. So he's praying about it, he's praying for them. All right, let's go to Luke chapter 9. Those verses you're going to find on 1476 and following. Everybody there? And then we're reading verse 18 and verse 28. Once, when Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, he asked them, "Who do the crowds say I am?" And then across the page, you have verse 28. About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto a mountain to pray. And that's when the transfiguration occurs. And then Luke 11, verse 1. You'll find that on 1480. 1480. Luke 11, verse 1. One day Jesus was praying in a certain place. When he finished, one of his disciples said to him, "Lord, teach us to pray, just as John taught his disciples." And there you have one of the renderings in the Gospels of Jesus teaching the concepts of the Lord's Prayer. And then finally we go to Luke 22, and you're going to find those verses on page 1503. 1503, starting at verse 39. Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." He withdrew about a stone's throw. We're in the Garden of Gethsemane there, aren't we? In verse 40, And then we go to verse 44. Being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. There's an intensity. Don't forget that in the course of that experience, Jesus describes his anguish, his grief, as being so heavy and so severe that he was barely able to hang on to his physical life. That if he allowed it to, it could have finished him off. And you and I have had those moments in life where the emotional stress, the physical stress, the intellectual, psychological stress of a situation all coming together, you know very possibly what that looks like and feels like because you've experienced it. Where you might even wonder, is this so heavy that it's going to actually eat me up, overcome me? And Jesus is experiencing that, and how does he battle with it? Two things.
Does it even more intense?
Okay, he gets even more intense and prays about it. And then what else happens? What does he allow to happen? He invites others to pray with him, but what else at the very end? You start thinking about it. Even God in human flesh doesn't just take it to the people around him, he takes it to the higher level and welcomes the angels to attend him. In his physical nature, God, start thinking about that. Just think that through for a second. As Paul tells us in his epistle, all of the deity, all of the Godhead in that bodily form, every element of the wisdom and the power and all that caused this universe to exist, in that moment, just before his trials and the end of his life, in this moment of anguish, the Creator allows a creature to serve and comfort him so that he can progress through the ordeal. I'm just saying that from this perspective of, if you're one of those people that says, I don't need any help, I don't need anybody else, it's just me and God here, and I'll count on him alone, and I don't care what other person or what. No. God himself, in a moment like that, where he had emptied himself of all of his glory, is demonstrating just how humble he is, that he needs the attendance of his created beings, in that case more powerful than any human beings, his angels, to attend him as an answer to his own prayer. What can we conclude about Jesus' prayer life? There's a lot of things, but where do we start?
He prayed early and often.
He prayed early and often about everything because he could see what was coming and he knew. Think about that. He knows what's coming and he knows what's going to happen and he knows it's all going to be good in the end, and yet he's still praying.
You can expect results.
He's expecting results.
He expected, or rather, he knew that God was important to be able to live life.
Yeah. As our human brother with a human nature, he knows how important it is to still have that connection to God to live the human life. Yeah, he's as human as you and I. So, think about that from that perspective too. If you're one of those people who always is praying in your head, just almost like a continuous conversation with your God, but you never stop to physically demonstrate that you're doing that, so that no one else around you even knows that it's going on. Even Jesus, who had the ability to have that conversation in a completely different way than any of us, because he's God as he's also human at the same time, still stops not only to pray with those around him, but at times pray himself in a way that they can see that he is praying, and then also teaches them how to pray. So prayer isn't just a personal thing, it's also very much a shared experience for all kinds of different reasons. Anything else? Go ahead, Barb.
Not only was it intentional, as you said, pointed out, but he also encouraged his disciples, his followers, to pray, not only for themselves, but for those around them.
Yeah. And then added to that is the dimension of how invested it all is. I mean, that idea of long prayers. And you know, it's interesting because it should help us understand just how completely connected this all has to be. So look at the next, taking it deeper. Agree or disagree, we shouldn't make it the pastor's job to pray regularly for our needs when we can do that ourselves. This is just another example of how we ask our pastors to live our Christianity for us. I didn't write it. There's a lot of ways you could take that and understand that, but react as you see it. I don't know any pastor that doesn't understand it to be part of what he's called to do.
But it's not what we should depend on.
Correct. And it shouldn't be we shouldn't depend on it in such a way that it's like substitutional.
Right.
Yeah, that he's doing it so I don't have to. All of our prayers are of value. What else? And Jesus certainly prayed on behalf of his disciples. They requested his prayers for them. So there's a good example there.
I'll say to pray for each other.
Yeah.
It's encouraged, it's powerful.
Pray for each other, and I would encourage you at the age I'm getting to be, when you ask me to pray for you, add to your prayers the prayer for my memory to be praying for you as often as I possibly can, because I do. And it's that kind of thing where it's the idea of, and to me that's the fabulous part about it. You know, driving around during the day and working on different things, when somebody comes to mind, pray for them. As soon as you're wondering about, I wonder how that went today, and maybe it's not an appropriate time to be calling them for an update, pray for them. You don't know what the outcome might be. And what's the worst thing that you could possibly do? Be praying for someone who's already in heaven. How's that going to harm them in any way, right? That idea of, in those kinds of cases where you're not sure how the surgery has gone or where somebody's at in regard to a hospice situation or something like that. It's actually happened more than once on a Sunday morning when we prayed for somebody that by the time the service is over and I go check my messages, we prayed 15 minutes after the person had actually passed away. Okay, there's no crime in that. It's not a problem. As they come to mind, pray. What else? I thought, did you have, no, yes?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And it goes back to that, part. We live as a Christian body, and we should be praying for each other, not just relying upon our pastors, pray for our needs. But also pray for, as you were saying, pray for his needs as well. What better way can we support our pastors or our call leaders
Yeah.
in that regard?
And not just here, but all kinds of other places too. So that idea of how we support each other with prayer and the interconnectedness of the community of Christianity.
I was going to say, on top of that, as our faith grows, I think it also becomes more comfortable praying. Right? It's part of your Christian growth. So it might be uncomfortable the first time, second time, but over time.
Get started doing it and realize that you're actually progressing your own faith and your own connection and how that all is built on trust. Let's look at the other one as we are 1 minute away from the word discipline can be a scary one for us. After all, we're not like Jesuits who believe they can draw closer to God by practicing certain spiritual exercises. And I read that sentence and I want to follow it up with one word with a question mark. Right? 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 None of us are like Jesuits, right? 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 Hopefully, please. Yeah. Scriptures teach us that good works, including prayer, flow freely and spontaneously from a heart full of faith. Where does discipline fit in here?
I think within the word discipline is the word disciple, and which is student. So we want to be students of the word.
Yep. So none of us wants to be a Jesuit, but all of us want to be disciples, right? And the word disciple is right there in the word discipline, and this idea of it shows us to be the followers that we're called to be, that we want to be, and how valuable that is to recognize this is one of the realities of discipleship. And so there's a number of them, but this is one of them, and it's a big one, and it did have a lot of impact or investment between Jesus and his own disciples when Jesus was here on earth. He taught them and he demonstrated for them.
Could I add one more thing?
Certainly.
Stacy's question. A pastor cannot live our Christian life. That's not what God has called him to do, or for us to allow others to do for us.
I would agree with that. I would also say, don't just limit it to pastors, because all kinds of people do that to other people too. Like, you kind of lean on the strongest Christian in your life to be the good Christian for all of us, kind of a thing. In their behavior, in their ability to pray, other things where you kind of offload elements of Christianity, and as long as one of us is doing these things that all Christians are supposed to do, that gives credibility before God for all of us as a family or as a congregation. Because I don't think it's just pastors that people lean on that way. And where I mean that in particular, the one I've heard the most is my grandma or my grandpa is such a rock, and I'm depending on him praying for me, and I'm depending on her being good for me, and all kinds of other things. And it's like each one of us has that responsibility ourselves. All right, wrapping up. To summarize this lesson, discuss the following quotation: praying is very difficult work. This is the reason it is also very rare. That's Martin Luther. It is the last thing the devil, the world, and our sinful flesh want us to do. But prayer is a wonderful privilege God has given us. So it says to discuss it, and then it gives us the summary statement that would be the gist of the discussion. And it is also called the summary. So I think it was a thought thing. The way it's constructed, even I wasn't sure of. Okay, you ask the question, you give us the answer, but then you also tell us to discuss it. That's usually a discussion killer when you answer the question right after you ask the question, and we're out of time. So, as always, that page that comes next, I hope you're enjoying some of the activities that you've been given to do, and I hope that you're adding to them. Here's another one that's going to take you into Luther's Small Catechism. just a little bit on the topic of prayer, table of duties, and other elements of all of that as well. Let's close with the blessing. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all. Amen.